Hello, everyone. Ian Hamilton with Good Virtual Reality here. Thanks for giving me your time. Today, I've got a podcast drawn from my first 6 months of work as an independent journalist supported entirely by community. I don't plan how my conversations with guests will go, but I do ask most of them the same two questions. How did you get into VR? And what was your favorite moment of presence in virtual reality? I've started to notice some themes. If I take these themes and combine them with the broader history of the last 15 years, I believe we can start to build a narrative and paint a pretty clear picture of the most important trend of my lifetime. Now, the narrative that's forming here is a hard one for me to express, and it may take years to write a book or produce a documentary that captures the full scope of what all these people are hinting at, because I refuse to get something wrong in framing it. You can listen to my conversation with CNET's Scott Stein to hear about some of the highest level ideas I'm grappling with when it comes to the social impact of these technologies. You can also read articles on goodvirtuality.com about the virtual pilot in my Recreation Room series who spends month after month in the simulated skies. You can read about the enthusiast who goes to sleep every night in a headset. Between these two perspectives, you can start to understand just how far VR will be felt over the full span of time. I think it's a profound mistake to view these people and their use of VR as outliers of the present instead of the vanguard of the future. Before we get into today's podcast, I've got to make a bit of a personal plea. I've included a Stripe link in the text below this podcast to donate directly to me. And if you enjoyed today's episode, I ask that you find your way to that link and give whatever you can to support my effort here. I've got a great base in my audience of paid subscribers supporting me, and sincerely, thank you all tremendously for your support. But frankly, I'm reaching the time when I'm thinking about how to diversify my income. There's multiple ways to do that, but I'm not in love with any of them. I don't want to raise prices, for instance, because I want my publication to be easily accessible. And if you have any leads on how I can increase revenue while maintaining the focus of my work and not creating conflicts of interest, you can shoot an email to editor@goodvirtualreality.com. Today's podcast begins with the voice of Samantha Gorman, the co-founder of TenderClaws. That's the studio behind a string of incredibly interesting projects, beginning with virtual reality all the way to Stranger Things VR. During the pandemic, TenderClaws released The Underpresents, with occasional live performers inside the experience, and then they went a little bit further and hosted ticketed showings of William Shakespeare's The Tempest. Thousands of these showings were held over the theatrical run of the show in virtual reality, with a single performer and guests joining in to partake with them in a bit of pantomime. Keep Gorman's answer in the back of your mind as you hear from all the other people I've been able to gather here. Many of them mention multiplayer experiences in VR, and that's what Gorman's comment seems to speak to at first. But I want you to consider that every experience you have in VR is a constructed space developed by artists who've made something for you to spend time inside. Every moment you experience in that space, everything you interact with, is because you received an invitation to explore and test the rules of the simulation that someone else has made for you.
I could watch silently as an invisible director into some of the Tempest productions. I felt most present when I was witnessing genuine moments of connection between players. And part of that was like enabled by this sort of virtual body. But I don't think it's a generalizable thing. I think it's also about really how you design the rules of the world and how you like invite people to participate, which is a lot of what we focused on and the actors focused on, is like creating positive social engagement. Those moments when I witnessed that, I felt like there was really something there uniquely that VR could bring. And I felt like I completely believed and was present in the world. What excites me about presence, how do you create intimacy and connection across these different, emerging technologies? I think it's actually maybe like your relation to others through the technology is what creates presence.
Now let's hear from Sonia Haskins, who spent the early days of Echo Arena at what was effectively the front entrance to one of the most well-loved spaces in VR, to help those people understand the simplest of interactions, using their hands in VR.
In Echo Arena, you were a robot, basically. You could compete in the arena, but you had to spawn to this little pod, and you would grab the bar in VR, and you would have to lift it. So for people who were brand new, when they initially spawned into that space, we would stand there, like a bunch of us who were basically just volunteers, and I didn't have a regular job at that point. I took care of my family and home, but I didn't have a job outside the home. So I would spend hours just sitting in that spawn area, welcoming people and saying, "Hello, we're so glad you're here." And they would be stuck in that little spawn pod. And so I'd be like, "Okay, now reach your hands down. No, your real hands. Grab the bar. Nope, grab the bar is right there in front of you. Now push up the bar." It's a funny memory because I laugh now thinking, what was I doing? I literally just spent so many hours of my life trying to tell people how to get out of this pod.
Next up, we'll hear from Jasmine Uniza, Thomas Marinchek, and Kay Guillory. Jasmine is the CEO of Flat to VR Studios, where they're already planning games into 2028. Thomas is also known as Fruxius online, and a kind of singular genius who is the maker of Creative Networks Neos and Resonite. And finally, Kay Guillory is an artist discovering how to paint subjects from virtual reality in physical reality using the practice of immersivism. For a bit of history, for those who might not know, Neos kind of blew up back when one of the people Thomas partnered with tried to stick crypto assets into the project. So he stepped out and started again from a blank slate with Resonite, which you can think of as kind of a mashup of Unity and VR chat, allowing you to build and edit whatever you want inside VR.
I was very into Neos, and Skiva and I spent a ton of time in there. I just remember so many things we used to do. I think there was this like racing track that we used to do. It was an underwater one that was super fun. There was a time when we were all sitting in like a tea house, except the tea house, obviously, because it's VR, instead of drinking tea, you're like sitting in the teacups and there's like steam coming out. And I had a lot of fun in Neos. That was my favorite moment of presence.
When I first started using Face Tracker, it was the Vive Facial Tracker. It was kind of one of the prototypes. And I was in VR, I was in my avatar. And I remember one of my friends in VR, they said something and they said they like to see me smile. And what's cool about it is I didn't realize I was smiling. They can see my expression on the other side of the planet, and they can see subtle human emotion through this avatar. And to me, it was very powerful.
My friends and I watched Severance together in VR chat, and we just had it up on a big, screen. And we would meet regularly. And it was because of all the time that I had spent with them, all the memories and all the things that we had ever been through. And yet we were still here. We're still meeting after years of knowing one another. And we're sitting down and we're watching a movie together. And I love when we do that. So that's one of my happiest memories. I made this map. It's called Gates. And it's in VR chat. And it's just an island. And it has a giant gate that actually leads out to Resonite. If you were to make that your home world and you log out and you make the Gate 2 map in Resonite your home world, then you're effectively using a gate to hop between one world and another. So I have a memory of sleeping and looking up at the forest.
Now I want to share a couple deep cuts from a pair of the most impactful VR developers ever to build an immersive space. First up will be a short and sweet answer from Guy Godin. As a reminder, every one of these answers today comes from a longer conversation on the Good VR podcast. Guy's episode is by far the most listened to episode I've recorded because he's the designer of Virtual Desktop, which has become the trusted portal to VR for a tremendous number of people over the years, as he's gone head-to-head with Meta's confusing shell game of platform rulemaking. The experience he mentions is a non-interactive ride through some of the most beautiful, dreamlike landscapes you've ever seen, and you can still grab it on Steam. Immediately afterward, I've got Anton Hand, the creator of Hot Dogs, Horseshoes, and Hand Grenades. I've had about 3 hours of conversation with Hand across the Good VR podcast and YouTube, as I believe H3VR2 is easily the most exciting game currently in open development for VR headsets. Built from the ground up with standalone in mind, I sincerely believe H3VR2 is going to surprise a lot of people when it debuts.
Probably Sans Peso, which was one of the demos back in the day, which was super well done. I mean, it was artistic, it had good music, it had everything really. So that was one of my favorites.
150 hours into playing Elite Dangerous which I had played entirely in a headset, that I finally had leveled myself up enough to get access to the Sol system and to fly around it. And I mean, that entire experience of Elite was just back to back to back to back. Like, that is a game when it's in VR that is fundamentally about experiencing a scale that your brain was not built for, that did not evolve for whatsoever, and trying to reckon with scale and distance and time. I don't think I've ever been transported to somewhere else as utterly as the time that I spent in that game. You sneak into a docking port by basically boosting at the docking port as perfectly as you can, shutting off everything in your ship so that the scanners don't see you, and then turning it on at the last minute without pancaking yourself on the inside of the docking ring. The first time I landed on a planet in Elite, which I did so without looking up how to do it, and didn't realize I was landing on a hard planet, i.e. like 1.6G, and coming down because of the path on the night side. So landing for it took like 20 some minutes to come down onto this planet because I wasn't doing it quite correctly. And I'm like landing in the dark, and so can just see the like running light telemetry of the planet's surface and hearing the cockpit shake. And I have never been like in a moment in virtual reality more than that. And so I measure everything else against it.
Now let's hear from Joseph Simpson, a big believer in the open web, who's been working recently on Apple Vision software while building a community in that space among developers. His answer speaks to the solitary discovery one can experience jumping from space to space.
My first headset was the HTC Vive, and I was just playing with all kinds of stuff I could find on Steam VR. I found Janus VR, which was this virtual worlds kind of modeled after the web, where you could just kind of tap on a world to enter it. And it was kind of slow and clunky, but every world was designed by someone. And it felt very much like just exploring the early internet, just kind of navigating links around. And I was just kind of moving throughout some of these environments and just checking out different scenes. And I popped into one that was clearly modeled after a side-scrolling game from like the NES era. And it was kind of ambiguous enough not to be any specific game, but I'm just like standing there like it just had this overwhelming sense of like I am inside the computer, like Tron style, like I'm inside the computer. I'm not looking at a display. I am finally inside a video game. And it was just like, I'm just like a lone person in a VR headset standing in this rather void place and just like overwhelmed by it. It was awesome.
These next two guests have worked in immersive design for over 3 decades. Jesse Schell is the head of Schell Games, with a huge list of games under his studio's banner, with the I Expect You to Die trilogy of puzzlers, the action sword fighting game Until You Fall, and they've recently handed off the development of Among Us VR back to the studio Innersloth. Avi Bar-Zeev, meanwhile, worked on the Apple Vision Pro and a whole series of projects over the years that have been highly influential. Back in the 1990s, each of them worked on the groundbreaking VR experience Aladdin's Magic Carpet Ride for Disney.
I'm trying to get people at our studio like, hey, maybe we should do some of this VR stuff at our studio. And some people are kind of into it, and a lot of people are not. They're like, oh, this is weird. This is going to be a fad. This is not going to be worth doing. And so we got a little project going. I was like, let's pull together the most persuasive demos that exist. There was a demo that really was powerful and was instrumental in the creation of I Expect You to Die. It was a very simple demo. It was non-interactive. In the demo, you put on the headset, you are sitting at a desk in a room with a lot of little props and things, a lot of little pieces and parts, and it's a very detailed room and lots of little things all over your desk. And then outside the window, you look out the window, and there are weirdly giant Tetris pieces kind of falling out of the sky. And that's the whole thing. You look around at this complex scene. And I remember putting this on and thinking, oh my God, this is the strongest presence I have ever had in a VR experience. And I had to now sit down and think about, why is that? This isn't even interactive. What is it? And that kind of gave us the tool. Like, we dissected it, figured out, oh my God, it's got the proprioceptive because I'm sitting down and I'm at a desk. It's familiar. I understand what a desk is and what a room is. And so that's all familiar. It's got lots of little details that you can kind of pull your attention and pull your attention and pull your attention. It's got near field, it's got far field. All of these things together just made it really strong. And it made me really believe in like, okay, strong presence is really possible on this platform.
We worked on this Aladdin's Magic Carpet ride. It required a $1 million computer per user. Right? That's the level of supercomputers required as an SGI supercomputer. And we had a bunch of them. We had one per seat. And the very first thing I did when I joined, trying to be clever, was I figured out how to shrink everything down so we could run at least 3 different shows all on the same computer. And that allowed us to do multiplayer in 1992 because now I could see the 2 other people in real time also on their magic carpets. Now, if you looked at them, it was just a carpet and a pair of hands. There was no body. But just adding the headset, I added in the virtual headset that tracked their motions as they moved. I could tell it was a human being just by the way it moved without a body, just the hands, just the carpet, just the headset. I was like, holy shit, that's another person in a virtual world with me running in high fidelity. And that wowed me. And that was back in 92. I'd say the next probably biggest one was an experiment where we wanted to see what was more important, latency or correctly offsetting the cameras. If you have cameras on your head, the cameras should be in your eyes to be perfect. They need to be where your eyes are, but they're out in front and usually offset. So that can cause warping of the image. It gives you the wrong perspective, and that's enough to make you fall over if you do it badly. Meta solved this by doing some clever image warping using a depth map of the scene. We just solved it a lot more simply by using a depth camera and reprojecting all the imagery. So that to me said, hey, actually, it's not the latency that's making me sick. It's the fact that the imagery is not in the correct position for where my eyes are. This particular test proved that if you are going to do video see-through, you'd better get this feature right. You'd better get the repositioning, the what they call it reprojection of the cameras to be exactly right to put the virtual camera inside your eyeball. And when you do that, now you can make eye contact with people. And now it actually feels like you're looking at each other. I'd had that experience once before using a depth camera with fusing depth and color together to make what I call a virtual hologram. It doesn't mean real holography. It just means Star Wars sort of style holograms. I could make eye contact with a virtual person in video fidelity. And it was like, holy shit, this is what we need in social scenarios. We need to make eye contact because it's just disconcerting to not be making eye contact all the time. It's very socially isolating. So happened repeatedly in various points through my career where we had this magic aha moment where it's like, that's a real person. That's not just a simulation. That's not just a non-player character, but there's a person behind it and they have thoughts and feelings. And, we should be having that more and more. That's a feeling we want to have all the time is that's not just somebody I can shoot. That's a real person. And they have feelings as well. So I better treat them well.
Golf Plus is in a category by itself in VR headsets, recreating full golf courses and allowing players to practice and play with their friends on courses they may never get access to or may only be able to visit once in a great while. Ryan Angle met a celebrity in his own VR game.
I got to play Golf Plus. We had Pebble Beach, and I got to play Pebble Beach multiplayer with Mark Wahlberg. So we're out there, and it was his first ever VR experience. We're talking to each other, and he's just like going crazy, like mind blown. Like, you gotta be kidding me! I played this course so many times. Like, you got that right, you got that right. Like, hitting shots, teaching him how to do mulligans, and then immediately getting into like kind of just golf banter and trash talking each other and having a great time. And it was just so cool to see, a celebrity for one thing. I'd never met him in real life. Meeting a celebrity in that way and then seeing him experience VR for the first time and seeing him experience Golf Plus for the first time. And then him just very quickly, going from all this kind of new technology and getting familiarized to very quickly getting into the golf banter and just feeling like we're playing around the golf together. And it was just such a kind of surreal, cool experience.
Ashley Pinnock is one of VR's most accomplished artists. She worked on Tilt Brush, Cosmonious High, at Alchemy Labs, Color Space, and Starship Home. Her answer speaks to the creative tools in VR that see designers directly using VR as a tool to make weird stuff.
There's so many awesome art apps out there. Pop into things like OpenBrush and Multibrush and Figment and Gravity Sketch and Substance Modeler, which was Medium before that. All of those types of things I think always grab my attention. Funktronic, I really love their game Fuji, which is just gorgeous and meditative, and it's musical and just delicious. Games from the folks who made Thrasher. I love that kind of like the rhythm violence sort of vibe. Anything that's kind of psychedelic, meditative. I also really enjoy just being able to step into people's brains. And so anything like that, where I feel like I'm stepping into somebody's brain, is very interesting to me.
The next two voices are Daniel Sproul and Thomas Van Bowel. The pair describe very different gaming experiences in VR, but they share in common the idea of VR bringing people closer together in configurations very different from those common in VR Chat or Resonite. Daniel is the head of Realities.io and the company behind Puzzling Places, while Van Bowel made Cubism and then followed it up with the first great mixed reality game, Laser Dance.
Maybe like 2016, 17 or so, when we had just set up our office in Berlin, and I had a friend over. We had two Vive headsets, and we were playing Serious Sam. And there was a Serious Sam co-op version that you could play in VR where you would just be next to each other, and it was this wave shooter, and we set up the play space so we were actually physically next to each other. And we just ended up playing the whole night through this like onslaught of, Serious Sam is just like always crazy, insane. Yeah, at the end we were just like so in it, like trying to beat the final boss, super sweaty because it was a hot day, and it just felt like such a cool shared experience, so physical, so intense, and so new at that time because like there was not that much multiplayer VR. That was just so cool. And then when we finally made it, that was just such a high and such a cool experience. Like that was what I hope VR would be on an entertainment level. Is like this very cool, very unique, very out there, intense experience with a friend together.
When the pandemic started, we were like, let's just like meet up in VR chat. So we did Rec Room another time. Like we tried like a couple of things, and just like hanging out with your friends in VR. It's so simple, but it is so effective and so interesting that like it's way better than a Zoom call. A lot of things are a lot more natural. In terms of conversation and sort of stuff. And it was so cool to see like, this is why this meeting is kind of great. VR meetup, where they would just like, they would have a bunch of VR developers over and they would like distribute a new version of their APK with like assets from one of the VR developers in there in like the sort of booth. And then the developers would like present their game and like what they're working on and stuff. And I just remember meeting so many like developers that way during the pandemic first. And then meeting them after the pandemic, this sort of co-presence with other people and being able to bridge that gap. It's not the same quality of like meeting somebody in real life, but dang, it does get like a lot of these things right. And like that's, to me, like the most immersive thing is to be with other people in VR like that.
We're getting near the end here of this episode, and I've put together 3 voices who all mention the same VR experience in their answer. You can probably guess which one it is before I say it, as it's the most polished and maybe the most expensive VR project ever to have been developed. Ashley Huffman is an expert in haptics. Yue Zhang was a teenager when the first headsets debuted last decade, and now he's got the most wishlisted game in all of VR by focusing on mature audiences. And Justin Spice built himself a cardboard cockpit of MechWarrior in the 1990s before setting off for a decade to build the VR equivalent.
It's got to be Half-Life Alyx. That game for me was one where I was both terrified because it really puts you in this dark, scary underground alley or like dungeony vibe, and you really feel like you're there. And when you're faced with a head crab, it's the most terrifying thing that I've ever experienced. But it's so good. They've done it so well with audio, sound, haptics that I played the whole thing despite my intense fear of any type of horror game. So for me, it's Half-Life Alyx. It will continue to be the game that is the pinnacle for me of a VR experience.
I used to play a lot of Gorn, and I guess it's just the most loud memory in my head, just kind of blowing up these gladiator things with my weapons. If you talk about like kind of getting into flow, Tetris Effect, I have really fond memories with. If you talk about like just that feeling of, wow, I'm in a proper world and adventure, that would be Half-Life Alyx.
The one that literally made me cry. It was the ending of Half-Life Alyx, and I won't
say anything about it in case people haven't played it. But the ending of Half-Life Alyx, I don't exactly know why I got so emotional. I think it was partly because the story was just so cool and the experience in the end was just kind of like trippy. I was like, whoa, this is what VR can be. This experience can't be touched by any medium. And I was just so engulfed in this experience. And I'm like, oh my God. I took my headset off and looked towards my girlfriend. I was like, I'm like tearing up right now. This is ridiculous. I think that was a moment that really made me realize how powerful the medium, and I'll say it specifically, can be, because I have, my gripes with VR in a lot of ways. That moment really, really stood out to me.
Before I leave you on today's episode with the voice of Sean Whiting, who headed community at Rec Room for many years, I wanted to say that I haven't had the time to be able to dig through my already substantial archives at Good Virtual Reality to gather together every answer to this question from across more than 40 episodes. It's a tremendous amount of work to cut out repetitive phrasing and awkward moments from these conversations, and I wish I could put even more time into the work so that these episodes respect the time and ears you give me when you listen to it. So again, please consider a donation at the Stripe link today to support the ongoing production of Good Virtual Reality, and send me an email to editor@goodvirtualreality.com if you have ideas for fundraising here or want to discuss a sponsorship. My thanks to one of Rec Room's co-founders, Cameron Brown, also known as Gribbly, for giving me permission to use music from Rec Room for the intro and outro of this podcast. That audio is from Quest for the Golden Trophy, which is the soundtrack to one of my favorite moments in a headset, working my way through that harrowing quest with my family. When you hear that music on future episodes, my hope is that the music takes you back there a little bit, before the needs of platforms and economics of startups became more important than the experience of individuals exploring a universe of endless possibilities. Thanks again for giving me your time, and I'll see you in the future. Here's the voice of Sean Whiting.
Played Dreadhalls in the DK1 quite a lot, and I demoed it to a lot of people who I thought, could handle it. But I loved Dreadhalls. I think a lot of it was the audio design in there, and then just having the torch and like the limited lighting. Hayden and I quickly discovered that like low light, or almost no light in that case, just the torch, really helped with presence, because you lose sense of like where the limit of the headset is, like on the peripheral. Like if the whole screen is light up, you're in a super bright scene, you can like almost look over on the DK1 and see like the edge of the screen, right? Like it becomes very clear. If you're in a very dark scene, especially something as dark as Dreadhalls, you almost get like full immersion. Like the FOV goes up to like 180, right? Because you can't tell where the edge is. The panel's not lit at all. And that's also why we made Converge like a nighttime scene. Let's pick a darker sort of skybox. Let's set it at night in this like forest. You can spend longer periods, or at least it fatigued us less to be in darker spaces. It's just less straining on your eyeballs. Like if the panel's fully lit up and you're in a daylight scene, it can start to wear on you after a while. But in like a chiller night scene or something like Dreadhalls, if you can stand the terror of all the monsters going on around you, like it's easier to stay in the headset, and the immersion is a little better. I took a lot of inspiration from Dreadhalls in the early days, and it was one of my favorite things to play.